My boyfriend said, "I can walk away. Girls are begging for me." He expected me to panic. Instead, I replied, "Great. There's the exit." I stopped texting and watched him crumble when he realized he'd lost leverage. The argument started, as they always did, over something so small it was almost invisible. It was a Tuesday night, and the air in our apartment was thick with the scent of garlic and simmering tomatoes. I was making his favorite pasta, a peace offering for a transgression I hadn't even committed yet but knew he would invent before the evening was over. He was leaning against the doorframe, scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving in a lazy, dismissive rhythm that set my teeth on edge. He hadn't looked at me once since he'd come home. He'd just dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door with a clatter that sounded like a judgment. "Did you remember to pick up the wine?" he asked, his voice flat, his eyes still glued to the glowing screen. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation in waiting. My stomach tightened. I had, in fact, forgotten. My day had been a chaotic mess of deadlines and a last-minute project that had kept me at the office an hour late. The simple task of stopping at the store on the way home had evaporated from my mind under the pressure. I knew what was coming next. It was a well-rehearsed script. "Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry," I started, turning from the stove to face him, my hands already rising in a gesture of supplication. Work was insane today. It completely slipped my mind. I can run out and grab it now. I was already calculating the time it would take, the pasta overcooking, his mood darkening further with every passing second. He finally looked up, his expression a carefully constructed mask of disappointment. It was his signature look, the one that made me feel about 2 inches tall. "Of course you forgot," he said with a sigh, placing his phone face down on the counter. The gesture was meant to signify that I was now receiving his full, undivided attention, a thing so rare it felt like both a gift and a threat. "It's one thing, Maya. One simple thing. I work hard all day, I come home, and the one small thing I ask for." He let the sentence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't about the wine. It was never about the wine. It was about my incompetence, my thoughtlessness, my failure to prioritize his needs above all else. "I know, and I'm really sorry," I repeated, my voice smaller this time. "I'll go right now." I started to untie my apron, but he held up a hand. "No, don't bother. The moment's passed. I'll just have water." He said it with the weary resignation of a saint, a martyr to my carelessness. He was punishing me with his forgiveness. It was a tactic he used often, one that left me feeling more guilty than any amount of shouting ever could. We ate in a silence that was louder than any argument, the clinking of our forks against the plates the only sound. After dinner, the tension followed us into the living room. I tried to bridge the gap, asking about his day, but his answers were clipped, monosyllabic. He was punishing me, and the sentence was indefinite. I was supposed to squirm. I was supposed to coax him out of his mood, to apologize again and again until he was satisfied that I understood the depth of my failure. It was a dance I had performed 100 times before. But tonight, something felt different. A wire inside me, stretched taut for years, felt like it was about to snap. I sat on the opposite end of the couch, watching him. He had picked up his phone again, that familiar blue light illuminating the hard set of his jaw. I could see from the angle that he was on a social media app, his thumb flicking upwards with a speed that told me he wasn't really seeing anything. He was performing indifference. He was waiting for me to break, to crawl across the couch and lay my head on his lap and tell him how wonderful he was and how awful I was. I just watched him, and I felt nothing but a profound, hollow exhaustion. "Are you just going to sit there and stare at me?" he finally said, not looking up. "It's creepy." His tone was laced with a venom that was meant to provoke. He wanted a reaction. He wanted the tears, the pleading. He thrived on the emotional chaos he created, and my silence was denying him his fuel. I didn't answer. I just kept watching him, my mind strangely quiet for the first time in a long time. The usual chorus of self-recrimination and anxiety was gone, replaced by a strange, cold calm. That's when he played his trump card. It was his favorite move, the one he saved for when he felt his control truly slipping. He locked his phone, tossed it onto the cushion beside him, and turned his whole body to face me. His eyes, which I once thought were the kindest I had ever seen, were now 2 chips of ice. "You know what, Maya?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "I don't have to put up with this. I really don't." I waited. I knew the next line by heart. I had heard it in different forms, whispered during arguments, hissed over the phone, but always with the same underlying message. He was the prize, and I was lucky to have him. My role was to be grateful, to be compliant, to be whatever he needed me to be, because the alternative was losing him. The alternative, he had always made clear, was unthinkable. I can walk away from this, right now, he said, leaning forward, his voice gaining strength. He was in his element now, the grand orator of my impending misery. I have options. Do you have any idea how many women would kill to be in your position? Girls are begging for a guy like me. A guy who's stable, who has his life together. I can walk away, and I won't look back. He sat back, a smug, triumphant look on his face. This was it. The checkmate. He expected me to crumble. He expected the floodgates to open, for me to panic and beg and promise to be better. He was waiting for me to reaffirm his value by showing him how terrified I was of my own worthlessness without him. I could see the whole scene play out in his eyes. He had already won, and in that moment, the tightly coiled wire inside me didn't just snap, it disintegrated. It turned to dust. The exhaustion I had been feeling all evening coalesced into a single, blinding point of clarity. It wasn't just about the forgotten wine, or his silent treatment, or even this final, pathetic threat. It was about the cumulative weight of 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 moments of being made to feel small, stupid, and endlessly replaceable. I looked at this man I had twisted myself into knots for, and I saw him for what he truly was. A hollow man, a bully who needed to tear me down to feel tall. I took a slow breath. The cold calm spread through my veins, chasing away the last vestiges of fear. I looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time, I wasn't looking at the man I loved or the man I feared. I was looking at a stranger, a pathetic, predictable stranger. A small smile touched my lips, a real one, and it seemed to confuse him more than anything else I could have done. Great, I said. My voice was even, clear, and utterly devoid of the panic he was expecting. His smug expression faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something, probably to escalate, but I spoke again, my voice cutting through the space between us like a shard of glass. I gestured with an open palm towards the front door. There's the exit. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a sound I hadn't noticed in years. Alex's face went through a rapid series of transformations. First, confusion. Then, disbelief. Then, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. He had been so sure of my reaction, so confident in his power over me, that my simple, calm agreement had completely short-circuited his brain. He was a puppeteer whose strings had just been cut, and he was staring at his hands, unable to comprehend why the marionette was no longer dancing. "What did you just say to me?" he hissed, his voice a low growl. The mask of the wounded martyr was gone, replaced by the ugly face of the tyrant who had just been defied. I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, my own expression unreadable. I felt strangely powerful, as if I had just discovered a superpower I never knew I possessed. The power of not caring what he thought of me. I said, "There's the exit," I repeated, my voice just as calm as before. "You said you can walk away. You said girls are begging for you. It sounds like you have some great options. You should go explore them." "I'm not stopping you." I gave a small shrug, a gesture of such profound indifference that it was more insulting than any curse I could have hurled at him. He stood up, his body rigid with fury. He was physically larger than me, a fact he had often used subtly to intimidate me, standing too close, speaking down to me. But now, his size seemed to mean nothing. He was just a man in a room, a man who had just lost all of his power. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he spat. "You think you can just throw away 3 years of your life like this?" "3 years of my life?" I replied, and this time there was a hint of steel in my voice. "Or 3 years of yours? You're the one who just declared he could walk away without a second thought. I'm just agreeing with you. I'm giving you what you want." I stood up as well, not to match his aggression but to signal that the conversation was over. I walked over to the front door and opened it. The hallway of our apartment building was empty and quiet. "Go on," I said softly. "They're waiting." He stared at me, then at the open door, his mind whirring, trying to find a new angle, a new tactic. He was a master manipulator, but his playbook only worked on a victim who was afraid of being abandoned. He had no contingency for a victim who held the door open for her own abandonment. He was lost. He grabbed his keys from the bowl and his jacket from the hook, his movements jerky and angry. "Fine," he snarled. "Fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've just done. Don't call me. Don't text me. We're done." "I won't," I said simply. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame on the wall rattled. I locked it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and took a deep, shuddering breath. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the first tremor of fear snaked its way up my spine. What had I just done? The familiar panic began to bubble up in my chest. He was right. 3 years. I had just detonated my life. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, my thumb already moving towards his contact. The urge to text him, to apologize, to say I didn't mean it, was a physical force, a tidal wave of conditioning. This was the part of the script where I was supposed to crumble, to prove him right. But then I looked around the apartment. It was our apartment, but everything in it was a reflection of him. His minimalist furniture, his choice of art on the walls, even the color of the damn throw pillows. I had slowly erased myself to make more room for him. The image of his stunned face flashed in my mind. The utter disbelief. The crumbling of his power. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that if I texted him now, I would lose forever. I would be handing him back the strings, proving that his threats worked, that I was nothing without him. I would be sentencing myself to a lifetime of this. A future of walking on eggshells. Of apologizing for crimes I didn't commit. Of being a supporting character in my own life. Instead of opening our text thread, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Sarah, my best friend. My fingers were trembling as I hit the call button. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" she said, her voice cheerful. Then she must have heard the silence on my end. "Maya? Are you okay?" A single sob escaped my lips, a sound I had been holding back. "I did it," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I think I just broke up with Alex." I explained what had happened, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. From the forgotten wine to the open door. I expected her to be shocked, maybe even to tell me I had overreacted. But there was only a moment of silence on the other end, and then she said, "Good." Just that one word. Good. It was like a lifeline. "He's been poisoning you for years, Maya. I'm so proud of you." Her validation was the anchor I needed in the storm of my own fear and doubt. "Now," she said, her voice turning firm, practical. "Listen to me very carefully. He is going to try to get back in your head. He's going to text you, call you, email you. He's going to apologize. He's going to rage. He's going to do everything he can to make you feel guilty. You need to cut him off. Completely. Right now." "Block him?" I asked, the idea feeling both terrifying and liberating. "Yes. Block his number. Block him on every single social media platform. Block his email. Everything. Don't give him an avenue. You need to starve him of the attention he feeds on." We stayed on the phone for the next 20 minutes as I did exactly that. With each tap of the screen, I felt a strange sense of release. Block on my phone, block on Facebook, block on Instagram, block on WhatsApp. It was a digital exorcism. When it was done, I felt strangely light. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been my companion for 3 years, the dread of waiting for his next text, his next mood swing, was gone. The silence on my phone was no longer a threat. It was a promise. It was peace. "Okay," I said to Sarah, my voice steadier now. "It's done. Now for the hard part," she said gently. "You have to stick with it. He's not going to give up easily. This is a massive blow to his ego. He's going to crumble, but it's not going to be pretty. He's going to make you pay for this." She was right. I knew she was right. But for the first time, the thought of his anger didn't fill me with fear. It filled me with a grim sort of satisfaction. Let him crumble. He built his castle on my fear, and I had just taken back the land. The first 24 hours were a blur of adrenaline and grief. I didn't sleep. I paced the apartment, which suddenly felt enormous and empty. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance, made me jump. I kept expecting to hear his key in the lock, forgetting that he had stormed out with his own set. The grief was for the man I thought he was in the beginning, the charming, attentive man I had fallen in love with. I had to mourn that illusion to accept the reality of the man he had become, or perhaps, the man he had been all along. By the second day, his counterattack began. It started with an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply, "Maya, please." My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. It was a long, rambling letter, a masterpiece of manipulative prose. He was sorry. He was so sorry. He didn't know what came over him. He was under so much stress from work. He loved me more than life itself. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. I was his whole world. He ended it with, "You're the only one who has ever truly understood me. Don't throw us away over one stupid fight." The old Maya would have dissolved into tears. The old Maya would have seen his pain and felt responsible for it. The old Maya would have drafted a reply, her fingers flying across the keyboard, ready to forgive, ready to smooth things over. But the new Maya, the one who had opened the door and said, "Go," read the email and saw it for what it was. A tactic. It wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to regain control. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry his favorite threat had backfired. I remembered Sarah's words. I created a filter to send any email from him, or any new address he might create, directly to the trash. I didn't reply. A day later, a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flower, arrived at my office. The card was attached to the cellophane with a small, perfect bow. My hands shook as I opened it. "I'm nothing without you. Please come home. All my love, Alex." My colleagues cooed over the gesture. "How romantic," one of them said. "You guys must have had a fight. He's definitely in the doghouse." They saw a grand romantic gesture. I saw a Trojan horse filled with emotional blackmail. I walked the bouquet down the hall and left it on the receptionist's desk. "Enjoy them," I said, without explanation. I went back to my desk and focused on my work, my focus a shield against the turmoil he was trying to create. When the emails and flowers didn't work, he moved on to phase 2. Our mutual friends. My phone started buzzing with texts from people we knew. The first was from our friend James. "Hey," spoke to Alex. "He's a complete wreck. Says you guys had a big fight and you kicked him out. What's going on?" I gave a vague, non-committal answer, saying we were working through some things. But the messages kept coming, each one more pointed than the last. Another friend, Chloe, called me. "Maya, you need to talk to him," she said, her voice laced with concern that felt manufactured. "He's not doing well. He told me you just snapped at him over nothing. He's worried about you." We all are. The narrative was set. I was the unstable one. I was the one who had snapped. He was painting himself as the concerned, loving partner, and our friends were buying it hook, line, and sinker. They were becoming his unwitting army, his flying monkeys. The call that broke me came from a woman I had considered one of my closest friends, a woman who had been a bridesmaid at her own wedding. "I don't know what's gotten into you," she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. "Alex is a great guy. He adores you. All couples fight. You can't just throw him out on the street because you're in a bad mood. You need to grow up and fix this." I felt the blood drain from my face. The betrayal was so sharp, so unexpected, it felt like a physical blow. "You have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. "You have no idea what it's been like." But she cut me off. "All I know is that I see a good man who is completely heartbroken, and I see my friend acting irrationally. Call him, Maya. For your own sake." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, phone in hand, the silence of my apartment pressing in on me. This was what he did. He isolated his victims by turning their own support systems against them. I was on an island, and he was poisoning the waters around me. That night was my rock bottom. The loneliness was a crushing weight. The doubt came screaming back. Was she right? Was I overreacting? Was a life of quiet manipulation better than this profound, agonizing isolation? The urge to unblock him, to call him and surrender, was overwhelming. I curled up on the couch, the one he had picked out, and I cried. I cried for my lost friends, for my lost love, for the years I had spent shrinking myself to fit into his world. In the depths of my despair, I remembered I wasn't entirely alone. I had Sarah, and I had my brother Mark. I called Mark, my voice thick with tears. He listened patiently as I recounted the phone call, the accusations, the crushing weight of it all. Mark was a quiet man, but his loyalty was fierce and unshakable. When I was done, he didn't offer platitudes. He just said, "I'm coming over." An hour later, he was at my door with 2 pints of ice cream and a look of grim determination on his face. He didn't try to tell me what to do. He just sat with me on the couch and listened. He listened for hours as I finally let it all out, not just about the last week, but about the last 3 years. The constant criticism disguised as jokes. The way he would subtly undermine me in front of friends. The financial control he exerted, insisting on managing all our joint accounts because he was better with money. The way he made me feel like I was constantly failing some unspoken test. As I spoke, I could see a slow, cold anger building in my brother's eyes. When I finally fell silent, exhausted, and empty, he looked at me and said, "Maya, this is abuse. It's not just him being a jerk. It's textbook emotional and psychological abuse. The people who are taking his side don't see it because he's a performer. He performs great guy for everyone else. You're the only one who sees the real show, because you're his only audience." His words were a bucket of cold water. Abuse. I had always shied away from that word. It felt too dramatic, too final. But hearing it from Mark, hearing it said with such quiet certainty, made something click into place. He wasn't just a difficult boyfriend. He was my abuser. And I was his victim. But I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You fight," he said simply. "You're still tied to him through this apartment. The lease is in both your names. You need to sever that tie. Legally, cleanly, and you need to get help, not just from me and Sarah. Professional help. Someone who understands this stuff." The next morning, Mark helped me find a therapist who specialized in toxic relationships and emotional abuse. He also gave me the number of a lawyer. Making those calls was the second hardest thing I had ever done. Right after opening that front door. My first therapy session was brutal. I sat across from a woman with kind eyes and a notepad, and I laid out the ugly, tangled mess of my relationship with Alex. She didn't flinch. She just nodded, her expression compassionate but firm. She gave me a name for what he did. Narcissistic abuse. She explained the cycle. Idealization, devalue, discard. He was currently in the hoovering stage, trying to suck me back into the cycle now that I had initiated the discard. His entire sense of self is built on the control he has over you, she explained. When you took that control away, you didn't just end a relationship. You attacked the very foundation of his identity. He's not crumbling because he misses you. He's crumbling because he's lost his primary source of narcissistic supply. His actions now are not about love. They are about regaining that supply, by any means necessary. She gave me strategies. The gray rock method, which involved becoming as boring and unresponsive as a gray rock when forced to interact with him. She gave me validation, tools, and a path forward. The lawyer was next. A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davies. I explained the situation with the lease. Alex was refusing to sign the paperwork to have his name removed, and he hadn't come back to get any of his belongings. "He's using the lease as leverage," she said, her fingers steepled. "He's hoping to drag this out, to force you to communicate with him. We won't let that happen." She laid out a plan. We would send him a formal, legal notice, giving him a deadline to retrieve his property and sign the lease-breaking agreement. If he refused, we would have grounds to take further action. The formal letter from Miss Davies' office seemed to be the thing that finally broke through his wall of love bombing and victim playing. The day after he received it, his tactics shifted dramatically. The loving emails stopped. The concerned calls to friends ceased. He had a new strategy: intimidation and character assassination. He hired his own lawyer, a man whose reputation preceded him as a pit bull. The first legal response we received was a declaration filled with the most vicious lies I could have imagined. It painted me as a mentally unstable, vindictive alcoholic. It twisted my past struggles with anxiety into a narrative of chronic hysteria. It mentioned a time, years ago, when I had a brief period of drinking too much after my father's death and blew it up into a full-blown, ongoing substance abuse problem. He was trying to build a case that I was an unfit tenant, that I had forced him out through my erratic behavior. He was trying to destroy my reputation to save his own ego. Reading it felt like being flayed alive. "This is what they do," Miss Davies said calmly over the phone, sensing my panic. "They scorch the earth. Don't react to it. It's designed to get a reaction out of you, to make you emotional and exhausted so you give up. We will respond to every single lie with cold, hard facts." My brother Mark became my rock. He offered to help me pack up Alex's things to put them in storage, to remove the final vestiges of him from the apartment. He insisted on being there as a witness, just in case Alex tried to claim I had damaged his property. It was a surreal and painful process. We moved through the apartment like archaeologists, carefully boxing up the artifacts of a life that was no longer mine. His clothes, his books, his ridiculous collection of pretentious film posters. As we were clearing out his side of the closet, Mark lifted a shoebox from the top shelf. It was heavier than it should have been. "What's this?" he asked. I shrugged. "I've never seen it before." We opened it together. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were not shoes, but a collection of small, strange items. A single earring, a concert ticket stub, a dried flower, a silver locket. And underneath each item was a small, handwritten note card. My blood ran cold as I picked one up. It was a note about a woman named Jessica. Broke it off after she started getting too needy. Cried for a week. Pathetic. Another one under the locket was about a woman named Chloe. Convinced her that all her friends were against her. Had her all to myself for 6 months before I got bored. It was a box of trophies. A graveyard of his past relationships. Each item was a token taken from a woman he had systematically broken down, and each note was a boastful little summary of his conquest. My hands were shaking as I searched for my own token. I found it at the bottom. It was the program from the first play we ever saw together. The note underneath it read, "Maya, the most challenging one yet. So insecure, it's almost too easy. 3 years and she still thinks I'm the best thing that ever happened to her. She'll never leave." Mark let out a string of curses, his face pale with rage. I just stared at the note, at the neat, familiar handwriting. This was my evidentiary turning point. Not for a court of law, perhaps, but for the court of my own mind. Any lingering shred of doubt, any microscopic particle of nostalgia or what if, was vaporized in that moment. This wasn't just a man with a personality disorder. This was a predator. And that box was his collection of pelts. Mark took a picture of the box and its contents with his phone. "We're keeping this," he said, his voice hard. "Not for the lawyers. For you. So you never, ever forget who he is." We packed the box away with the rest of his things. The sight of it had chilled me to the bone, but it had also forged something new inside me. A spine of pure, unyielding steel. The fight was no longer just about Elise. It was about my survival. With the evidence from the trophy box fueling my resolve, we moved forward. Miss Davies sent a scathing response to his lawyer, refuting his claims and calmly stating our position. We set a date for a formal mediation to finalize the division of property and the signing of the lease termination. Alex had no choice but to agree. His attempts to stall and intimidate had failed. He was being forced into a final confrontation. The mediation was held at a neutral law office downtown. The room was sterile and impersonal, with a long polished mahogany table and uncomfortable chairs. I walked in with Miss Davies, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My therapist had spent our last session preparing me for this. "Gray rock," she had repeated. "Be factual. Be brief. Do not engage with any emotional provocation. He will try to get a reaction. Do not give him one. Your indifference is your weapon." Alex was already there with his lawyer. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He had tried to dress nicely, in a suit I had bought him for his birthday, but it hung on his frame. When he saw me, he tried to offer a small, sad smile. It was a pathetic attempt to rekindle some long-dead sympathy. I met his gaze for a single, fleeting second, my expression a complete blank, and then I looked away, focusing on the notepad in front of me. I could feel his eyes on me, trying to find a crack in my armor, but I refused to give him anything. The mediation began. The lawyers did most of the talking, their voices a dull drone as they went over the list of assets and liabilities. The conversation was purely procedural. Who would pay the fee to break the lease? The date by which his property, now in a storage unit I had paid for, would be his sole responsibility. It was all so mundane, so bureaucratic. But beneath the surface, the air was crackling with tension. I could feel Alex's frustration mounting with every passing minute of my silence. He couldn't stand it. He finally broke, interrupting his own lawyer. "Maya, can we just talk?" he said, his voice pleading. "Just for a minute? Without them?" He gestured at the lawyers. "This is ridiculous. We loved each other." "Miss," Davies immediately held up a hand. "My client will only communicate through counsel," she said, her voice firm. Alex's face darkened. The pleading victim was gone, replaced by the familiar sneer. Unbelievable, he muttered, shaking his head and looking at his lawyer as if to say, "See what I have to deal with?" He then turned his full attention back to me, ignoring Miss Davies completely. "You're really going to do this? Throw everything away? After all I did for you? Who's going to take care of you, Maya? Who's going to put up with your moods, your anxiety? You were a mess when I met you. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stared at my notepad, my pen held tightly in my hand. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. I could feel the hot sting of his words. But I remembered my therapist's voice. Do not give him one. Your indifference is your weapon. He was waiting for me to defend myself, to argue, to cry. He was trying to draw me back onto his battlefield, the one where he always won. My silence was driving him insane. He was getting no reaction, no fuel. His desperation escalated into pure venom. This was his villain monologue, his last-ditch effort to hurt me, to prove he still had power over my emotions. "You'll be nothing without me," he spat, his voice rising. "You'll come crawling back in a month, begging me to take you back, but it'll be too late. I'll be with someone who actually appreciates me. Someone who isn't a broken, neurotic basket case." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with a hateful fire. "I know you found the box," he whispered, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I hope you enjoyed it. A little collection of my past successes. You should be flattered you even made it in there. None of them lasted as long as you did. None of them were as easy to control." And there it was. The confession. The gloating admission of everything I had suspected, everything I had pieced together. He wasn't just admitting it. He was proud of it. He sat back in his chair, breathing heavily, a triumphant look on his face. He had finally laid all his cards on the table, certain that this final, brutal display of cruelty would be the thing to finally break me. He expected me to scream, to lunge across the table, to dissolve into a puddle of humiliated tears. He expected a reaction. I slowly lifted my head and looked at him. I looked right into his eyes. And I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, quiet, pitying smile. I didn't say a word. I just held his gaze and let that tiny smile convey everything I was feeling: contempt, relief, and utter, complete freedom. His face fell. My smile, my calm, my complete refusal to be wounded by his pathetic, hateful words, was the one thing he had never anticipated. It was the final, undeniable proof that he had lost. He had no more power. The strings were cut, and he was the one left tangled in them. His lawyer, looking deeply uncomfortable, cleared his throat and slid the final document across the table. "If we could just get these signed," he said quietly. Alex, defeated and visibly deflated, picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He scribbled his signature on the line, his movements angry and jerky. He shoved the paper back across the table without looking at me. I took the pen and signed my name. My own hand was perfectly steady. My signature was clear and firm. I stood up. "Miss Davies gathered our papers." I didn't look at Alex again. I just turned and walked out of that sterile, airless room, out into the bright afternoon sun. I felt like I had been holding my breath for 3 years, and I was finally exhaling. The legal battle was over. The ties were severed. But I knew the real victory wasn't the signature on that piece of paper. It was the quiet smile in that room. It was the moment I looked my abuser in the eye and felt nothing but pity for his small, empty soul. The weeks that followed were a period of reclamation. I moved out of the apartment we had shared, leaving behind the ghost of him and the memories of my own unhappiness. I found a small, bright apartment in a different neighborhood, one with big windows and a small balcony where I could grow plants. My brother and Sarah helped me move, and we filled the silence with laughter and bad pizza. For the first time in years, my home felt like my own. I painted the walls a color he would have hated. I bought a comfortable, ugly armchair just because I liked it. Every choice was an act of rebellion, an assertion of my own identity. I continued with therapy, and it was hard work. I had to unlearn years of his conditioning. I had to learn to trust my own judgment again, to silence the critical inner voice that sounded suspiciously like him. There were days when a wave of sadness would hit me, a phantom limb of grief for the future I had once imagined. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. They were replaced by a quiet, steady sense of peace. I had to grapple with the imperfect nature of justice. There was no court that could punish Alex for the years of emotional theft, for the slow, methodical erosion of my self-esteem. There would be no public acknowledgement of his crimes. The people who had taken his side would probably always see me as the one who had been unreasonable, and I had to learn to be okay with that. My justice was my freedom. My verdict was my peace of mind. My sentence was a life lived on my own terms, a life in which he had no part. I established permanent boundaries. I got a new phone number. I scrubbed my online presence, making myself harder to find. I let go of the friends who had served as his enablers. A painful but necessary amputation. My world became smaller, but it was also safer, more authentic. My support network was now comprised only of people who had seen me, who had believed me, and who had stood by me. Months later, I was sitting in my ugly, comfortable armchair, sipping a cup of coffee and watching the morning sun stream through my clean windows. The air was quiet, filled only with the sound of the city waking up and the soft rustle of leaves on the tree outside my balcony. I thought about him, not with anger or sadness, but with a detached sort of curiosity. I wondered if he had found a new supply, a new woman to cast in the role I had vacated. I hoped, for her sake, that she would be stronger than I was, that she would see the mask for what it was much sooner than I did. A scar remained, a faint, silvery line on my soul where the wound had been, but it didn't ache anymore. It was just a reminder of a battle I had fought and won. It was a testament to my own resilience. He had expected me to panic, to crumble, to beg for the scraps of his affection. He had built his entire identity on that expectation, but I had refused to play my part. I had looked at his ultimate threat, his grand declaration of his own value, and I had called his bluff. I stopped texting. I stopped calling. I stopped caring. And in the ensuing silence, I had not only watched him crumble, I had watched myself be reborn. The exit I had shown him had also, in the end, been my own. It was the door to the rest of my life.